God is this beautiful place that I'm journeying with you today. Thank you for joining me. My name is Shone, and this is Candid Talks, a place where I talk about anything that I feel that I wish to talk about for reasons that may or may not become aware to me or you. So thank you for listening. So today I found this odd camera angle. It seems that the best views are always the views where I'm holding the camera. It's kind of hard to get trees and things to stand still and be where you want them to be, right? So today I wanted to talk about something that I have been wanting to talk about for a long time. And the reason why is because I've done a lot of research into this particular topic. And I'm sitting there searching my book for it right now. I wrote some notes out of it so that I could essentially be a little more organized with how I present things. Because sometimes I feel that as I jump from topic to topic, I may become a little convoluted at some time. So I decided to start this recording all over again because I've tried to do it several times now. And at first, when I was talking about the topic, which is Atlantis, the mythological city, they say, is that I was trying to talk about too much. And the topic of Atlantis is very overwhelming, mostly because it's a very big subject. And when I first started talking about it, I had so much to say, and I was going from one place to another, and then I was jumping to Lemuria, and Lemuria is definitely associated with Atlantis. And I decided as I would restart this is not only to have notes, so it's a little more organized. I would also just stick to the topic of Atlantis today. So, first of all, in my opinion, Atlantis was real. Now, there has been a lot of talk of Atlantis being mythology. And mythology such as the Romans, the Greeks, the Vikings, the Vatican Church, they all talked a lot about mythology, and they've all brought a lot of so-called mythological stories into our modern day perspective or our filters based on the large amount of movies they do about all these different topics. And so how I've seen it is they've taken the idea of Atlantis, which is, by the way, one of the most common memories or things that people feel comfortable hearing about and the possibility of it. Like all you have to do is look at the Atlantic Ocean and see that there's some sort of remnants within the subconscious of the human collective of there being a place once called Atlantis. Not only that, there was writings about it in Plato, which is a Greek philosopher from a very, very long time ago. He talked about Atlantis as well. So there are different, we'll say it, historical references made to this place, which it's tried to be pawned off, not common. It's tried to be calmed off. They try to con it off, or they try to, I don't know. Anyways, so they try to hide it within the realm of mythology. Yes, there it is. They try to hide Atlantis within the realm of mythology, along with King Arthur and giants and dragons and Avalon and, Roman beings who posed as gods. All of them. However, as I said before, I feel that Atlantis is real, and my study on the topic makes me feel that this is an important topic to actually come out in mainstream conversation. The reason being is that I believe Atlantis to be an extremely important part of our history. Many of us have had past lives in Atlantis, and the situation with Atlantis is Atlantis came to its end quite abruptly. Now, I have heard different reasons of why this happened, but regardless of why it happened, the ending of Atlantis came as it sunk into the ocean, or it was hit by a big wave, or maybe that wave was caused by Atlantis sinking into the ocean. Nonetheless, there was an instant death of that civilization. It wasn't a long, drawn-out process in the sense of like Pompeii, like It came that overnight kind of idea. It was very, very sudden. And many of us, as I said before, had past lives in Atlantis. Now, when that big wave happened, we instantly died. And we instantly died as Atlantis sunk. And there is a belief out there that many of us didn't even know that we died. And it was such a sudden rush of events, water disappears, apparently, like in the movies, and then a big wave comes, and then the wave crushes, and there's not even enough time to react or to understand what's happening. And the trauma that was created that day was extremely overwhelming. Now imagine yourself standing on a beach, or you're in your seaside home, and then suddenly you look out the window and the water has receded and drawn back into a giant wave, and it's coming directly at you. How many of us, with the exception of having to see movies such as 2012 or any other end of the world style movie, how many of us would have been able to recognize what that meant in that moment? If I had never seen anything like that and there's a giant wave, it might not be too apparent to me that that wave means certain death for a majority of people. Now, with that sudden death, in one of our incarnations of our past lives, that would have caused trauma. Many of us perhaps would see it and we would run, but a lot of us, as you see in the movie, I think it was 2012, it really did happen in the movie, there really isn't much running. A giant tsunami wave of epic proportion, there really aren't too many places to run. And so even though that some people would have run to no avail, it wouldn't have mattered. There would have been a lot of trauma suffered. And now, science doesn't tell us this. However, science has shown that trauma is passed down generationally. This means your grandparents who came back from war, your great-grandparents, your great-great-grandparents, if they came back from war or they suffered the traumas of war, for example, that's passed down not just to the family that they come home and they try to deal with the traumas that they went through and, the alcoholism, the abusive nature of a survivor of war. Not to say that those aren't traumas as well, but they're also suffering from traumas from their parents as well. And then on top of that, they're giving their traumas down several generations. So great-grandchildren, for example, who never met their great-grandfather who went to war of 1918, the First World War, and suffered. And even if he didn't come home, still had that trauma within their DNA. And as I said, this has been shown in scientific experiments. I'm sure you can look on the internet for them. However, these traumas are generational. And so this kind of leads us quickly back to the traumas of our past lives in Atlantis. That trauma that happened from that life could be passed down, could still remain within us. And perhaps it's something that we haven't acknowledged. And many of us still experience traumas. Perhaps someone's irrational fear of water might be something that's related to a trauma from a past life. Say, for instance, Atlantis, when a giant wave crashed over your beach while you were frolicking along one day. Now the interesting thing about Atlantis is Atlantis was at an ascension point. They had been evolving to the point where they too were in the process of ascending. And this is a time, therefore, that should have been celebrated. However, Atlantis was a society that was very patriarchal. It was very male-dominated with masculine energies. It was governed by more of the male figures, such as our society is now, or at least was up until 1970s sometime. When the funny thing about my birthday, May 12th, is that was the day that they stopped calling all storms by only female names. So they opened it up to using men's names when it came to certain storms as well. So society was in the Atlantean times, more patriarchal, and it was more based around science and technology, and they reigned supreme. And of course, this was an example of the imbalance of masculine and feminine divine energy, or just overall masculine, feminine energies. And this imbalance essentially led to a polarized society where science and technology reigned supreme, and they were more concerned about knowledge and advancement and their own civilization. So it was more of a self-centered civilization. And this led to them relying heavily and almost becoming dependent upon AI. Now, while I believe that AI has always been here in some form of fashion, there is living with things, and then there is being dependent upon them. So an interdependent community might employ or work with AI, but a dependent community on AI might have more of their creativity handed over to AI. Like, for example, cutting the art department at a studio and letting AI decide what all the movies look like based on a few ideas set aside in a script would be turning your department, or basically letting creativity to go. It's kind of what's happening in Hollywood now with all these AI movies that are coming out with these actors that you can obviously see are not that actor. Anyways, so Atlantis as well started to become a lot more reliant upon AI. And this led to leaving the society open to a darkness. And this darkness turned into less compassion. See, what the Atlantean people had been doing is they went through something very similar to us. They had a very big pandemic, we'll call it. And this pandemic had led to sicknesses. And in order to fix the sickness, they created different types of medicines, and then these medicines led into more illnesses, and then there was a lot of genetic defects, and then these genetic defects led into human experimentations, and then this human experimentation led into the genocide of the apparent victims. So rather than deal with these mutations that had occurred through the usage of certain medicines that they were trying to use in order for their science, for their population not to die, they ended up killing off more simply by, they didn't want to see them. I heard this story about how the people who were mutated from the infection were sent through to an island where they were supposed to live off their area, the rest of their lives on that island. However, what the judges were unaware of was that they were not sending these people to an island to live, that they were genociding them. They were killing them when they went to the island. And this was a solution that was decided upon rather than the society having to face what they were essentially participating in. Because you see, by not standing against something and allowing it to happen is a sign of participation. So in my opinion, for all of those people that lived in Germany and knew what was happening, even though that they didn't participate themselves into it, they, in a sense, were participating by not speaking against. Now, of course, we do live in a world where people who did speak out were unfortunately silent. So there comes the double-edged sword, to speak out and be reprimanded for it, or to stay silent and participate in it. So it's not that there's ever a right way of or a wrong way. It's just really examining what did happen. So anyways, so moving on from there, the Atlantis, as I said, they were very technologically advanced. They probably had the iPhone 88 or 89. And now here's the interesting part. Where was it? Many people have spent a lot of time trying to figure out, where was Atlantis? If it was real, where was it? Well, Atlantis was supposedly in the Atlantic Ocean, hiding under plain sight. Call it the Atlantic Ocean, Atlantis. Now, where in the Atlantic Ocean was more around off the coast of Florida, down in that Bahamas areas, across portion of the lower Atlantic Ocean. And there are some anomalies that still exist there, such as the Bermuda Triangle. The Bermuda Triangle has a really weird effect that happens, and supposedly partially to do with a set of red crystals that remains in the ocean, underneath the ocean, which were once on the surface of Atlantis. Prior to that, they were in Lemuria, stolen from Lemuria, supposedly. Now, these red crystals were a major reason why that Atlantis came to its fateful end. They were a powerful crystal which was stolen from Lemuria, from what I understand. And I say from what I understand to leave myself open to other narratives which possibly support an alternative version. But from what I understand, the Lemuria had these red crystals which were very powerful, and the beings of Atlantis, through their greed and technological desire to advance themselves, they took these red crystals, because what these red crystals had the ability to do was to help with communication to the human's ancestors, or to life's ancestors, or to some other place. They also had great healing power in them, or perhaps a conduit to connect the user to a healing power. See, the Atlanteans, they had just went through massive deaths because of the medicines that they were creating to fix another death. So you can kind of see that darkness creeps into a society, and then it helps it propagate that fear or that lower vibration, and then it snowballs into an effect to the end. And you can kind of see that by what I'm saying is Atlantis went from having a disease to fixing the disease with another disease that led into almost like a war, that led into genocide, that led into experimentations, and then it just kept pulling society down. Well, the compassion of the Atlantean people kind of disappeared. You know, there's that stories from the man in the high tower, I think it's called, but it's the idea that I referenced the movie or the TV series because I don't know too much about this actual historical part from historical records, but supposedly during World War II, the Nazis, they euthanized people who had genetic abnormalities. And that's essentially what was happening in Atlantis as well, is that if you had any sort of genetic anomaly, you had yourself or someone in your family had you terminated so that you could keep the bloodline clean. And this event was happening in Atlantis. And as I said, the actual continent, which was a spherical shaped landmass that supposedly had 3 rings. And the interesting thing about these 3 rings is that they, in a sense, separated class. So you had on the outer ring the workers of the Atlanteans, and then in the inner ring you had the more people, the higher class people, the upper class, and then on the inside of the ring you may have had royalty and the selected few that were allowed to be in there. Now, as I was mentioning, Atlantic Ocean, Atlantis, hiding in plain sight. You know, you can erase Tartaria without first erasing tartar sauce. Kind of gives it away. One of the little known facts, perhaps, is that there are roads. There are some sort of stone roads that are underneath the Atlantic Ocean or off the coast of the Bahamas or somewhere in that same area. And scientists have known that. As I said before, scientists have also known that trauma is passed down through generation. And more importantly, different secret societies were fully aware that traumas were passed down, that traumas were passed from generation to generation. So for example, if people had an issue with money, say for instance in the Great Depression, that their children and their children's children and their children's children, it would keep going down, that they would have that same trauma that was built up and around money. So that being in lack and that fear of not having enough and struggling and all of those characteristics that we put around poverty and we put around lack of money, that those can be generationally, and I will probably say are generationally passed down. So where do we go from there? as I said, they began to rely on medicines. This led to issues in their culture. Eventually, it led to their culture falling apart, becoming more connected to power, to greed, to struggling, as opposed to thriving. And eventually, it led to the end of their civilization. There are stories of how that happened, the king being involved, as I said, stealing the red crystals themselves being used incorrectly, causing the destruction of Atlantis, as well as waves of water crushing them and the actual island or continent, however we look at it, sinking to the bottom of the ocean. Now, this is very similar to one of the two paths that we are on right now. There's a very well-known channeler, his name is Bashar, and he talks about being on a converging and then a divergent path. And the converging part was everyone's timelines converging into one. And then from that one timeline, everyone choosing one of two paths, almost to say. One was that we were going to ascend and move into a higher state of consciousness. And the other one, we were going to continue living and eventually succumbing to a path where we became too reliant on AI. And this you can kind of see is happening in our civilization right now. There is a huge reliance on AI. People are talking to AI for absolutely everything. They're asking for medical diagnosis. They're asking for planning of their day. They're asking questions about their personal issues. They're asking for information when they're trying to find truth, perhaps. And the AI basically gives them whatever the AI thinks is right. See, we have been, for the last many, many years, surrounded by AI, and we knew it, but we didn't know it. So there are certain search engines that are actually AIs, and they've been collecting every bit of information they could get from us. We would join points programs and we would give all of our personal information, including our buying habits, and we'd be entering it into a whole AI computer system. So you can easily see how we are becoming more reliant. There's AI deep fakes. There's AIs making movies. There's AIs making whole YouTube channels. And while there might be some human interaction with the channel, there's channels out there that the videos are AI, the cinematography is AI, the scripts are AI, the voices on the channels are AI. And often I hear these AI channels repeating stuff or mispronouncing words. It's kind of funny. So we are definitely becoming more reliant. Now, I have used AI in my channel to do with my pictures, and I was using it because I was learning about AI. Now, I probably still, when I have the opportunity, create more AI images because some of the AI images are just immaculate. They are stunningly beautiful, and there is so much high vibrational energy that I've imposed or infused my own work that I did with Jasper AI. So I'm not opposed to AI. I'm just saying that there is more of a heavier reliance on AI. For example, Hollywood doing an entire movie in one warehouse and then being up in the Himalayan mountains or in the Amazon or whatever movie that I'm thinking about right now, but to literally leave the entire AI or an entire set team to an AI, or creating a cartoon character in a movie, and then instead of having graphic designers and such, just get an AI to generate what this cartoon character does for the whole movie. Not really that hard. So where do we go from here? The question is, why am I talking about this ancient place? Why am I talking about this supposedly mythical place that could or could not have existed? And how does this affect me? Or how should I say, how does it affect you? Well, first of all, truth is important. It's important that we know the truth and that truth stops being shielded from us. And I say it that way, shielded from us, because, well, the truth does set you free. If you're not ready for the truth can cause increased amount of traumas. So there's a lot of truth out there that's going to be coming out that's available to us even right now. But not having access to the truth means that we don't even have the opportunity to know the truth. And you can't fix a problem if you're unaware of it. So for instance, as I was mentioning before, traumas being generational, like there's a lot of people who sit in offices for hours and hours and hours talking about their traumas and their issues with their parents and their whatever else that the psychiatrist can bring up onto the table for them to constantly regurgitate. Well, most people don't know that when we talk over and over about things that definitely those things that didn't resonate with us, that we found painful and such, that our body doesn't fully understand that they're reliving it. But at the same time, if we're spending hours and hours and lots of our money talking to psychiatrists about problems that we can't seem to get to the bottom of, yes, there are some issues that those different modalities can help us with. But if the problem is from a past life of ourselves or from a past generation of ourselves, and that's where our trauma, which is affecting us today, is affecting us, and we're not aware, first of all, that we had lives in Atlantis, and secondly, we're not even aware of a scientific, supposedly, conclusion that this does happen. And as I mentioned before, the secret societies know. The secret societies, they grow up knowing a lot of the stuff that we're not able to know, that we're not allowed to know. And so by talking about Atlantis and about getting this idea more so into the mainstream consciousness, not only can we decidedly agree that the place did exist, that there's enough evidence to support that it did exist, from Plato to modern to Sarah's work, I forgot her last name, and to many other channelers and archaeologists and historians and explorers. So when we know this happened, perhaps we can start addressing the trauma that we have taken on. Perhaps, as I said, it's our fear of water. And if there's a reason for someone having a fear, that's great. But what if it's an irrational fear that can't be understood? You've never had an issue with water in this life. Well, being able to go back and say, okay, well, in a past life, this happened. So see, right there, you have to address that there are past lives. You have to address that history has not been fully disclosed to us, and that Atlantis did exist, and the scientists and researchers have been hiding information, or maybe not them, but their controllers have been hiding this information. See, I have this one theory that one of the things that holds all of us back from moving forward is that we all hold on to an abundance of trauma. And until we deal with this trauma, until we work through it, it's going to be very challenging to move forward on a spiritual path, because all different aspects of society were hijacked, and we're having to sort through, using our discernment, which is true and which is not. And I believe that Atlantis was real. And once we realize and we come to terms with this, we can then start to move on. And if any of us still hold trauma from that day when Atlantis went down, and supposedly that day was October 31st. October 31st, I believe, was the day when the Great Wave hit. And then there's the 31st, the 1st, and the 2nd. There's some sort of trio of days there surrounding that day. Anyways, so when we recognize that this event did happen and we're able to release that trauma in this version or incarnation of us, helping our former self perhaps release their unknowingness that they died. See, there's a lot of things about this world that we're not familiar or even have a slight understanding of, and it can be becoming overwhelming. Different quantum theories and quantum entanglement and a whole bunch of big words that we'll work on later. However, that's why I think it's super important that Atlantis becomes a topic of conversation, so that we can begin our healing, so that we can know the truth of our past. We can know where humans came from. We can move away from control mechanisms such as religion and governance and all these other patriarchal control mechanisms that have been placed on us. So I hope what I said today makes sense. I'm happy just to start releasing this information and not worry too much about how it sounds. And I found a tool that I can put the audios after I record them into it. And what it'll do is it'll clean up a lot of the pauses and the filler words. And I've put a couple of my old Candid videos in there. And what they've actually done is some of them, they've lowered them between 3 to 5 minutes. It's amazing that in human conversation, there are so many wasteful moments of well, there goes another one, just pausing or fillers or like, all those words. So I thank you for joining me today. I truly appreciate your attention. I truly appreciate your desire to listen to me first, but more importantly, perhaps see that I have something that might be beneficial to you. And the more that we share with one another and we learn from one another, then the stronger as a community and the better communists we can be. Talk about communism in communities later. So thank you for joining me today. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope that there was something interesting to look at on this marsh that I'm in right now. Have a wonderful day. And I truly do hope that you will join me over at Patreon and become part of the community that is going to change the world. If you're listening to me still, then you definitely it would be very advantageous for the whole world if you were to join me over at Patreon, and let's bring something new to the structure of how we live in our world. So have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you later.